So we're going to jump right in, and we're so happy to have you all here tonight. We really appreciate it. This is night two of our Advocacy Academy series here from the ACLU of Vermont, and you're joined by the members of the ACLU Vermont Advocacy team. Let's advance the slides so we can walk through folks through the agenda and do a couple of intros. So tonight's presentation is going to be done in webinar mode. So cameras can be on or off, but if you want to pin the speaker and turn on captions, you can do that. But your cameras will be off, so don't worry about interrupting us with what's happening on your end. And as we go through the presentation, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to do our best to answer questions as we go. We're not planning on having like a Q&A section at the end, but we might, stop periodically throughout the presentation to let folks know to address some of the questions, but feel free to ask as we go. Tonight's session is meant to be interactive because we're going to be covering a lot of ground and a lot of things that we think will be helpful for folks as they're thinking about engaging with the legislature and with legislative advocacy with an eye towards the legislative session starting in January. So first, we're going to start with a little bit of Legislature 101. Like, what is the legislator? Who are legislators? And then we're going to go through a little bit about how you actually find out what's happening in the building and how do you connect with your legislators. And then we're going to dive into how do you influence the debate in terms of having conversations with legislators, other people who you might be trying to persuade on some of these issues, going through things like crafting your personal story, crafting your pitch, and things like deep canvassing. So it's going to be an exciting evening. We got a lot of content to get through. And with that, we're going to do a few intros and then get started. So I am Falco Schilling. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Advocacy Director here at the ACLU of Vermont, which means I oversee our work in the State House and our work in community with these fine folks here on our advocacy team. And now I will pass it over to Jordan Souter.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're able to join us. My name is Jordan Souter. I use he, him pronouns. I'm policy advocate for the ACLU of Vermont. Been here for about a year now, so really excited about that. And yeah, I handle a lot of our criminal legal reform work and focus on our Smart Justice campaign, also focusing on prisoners' rights, things like that. And yeah, I largely work at the State House, pushing for good legislation that helps protect and promote our civil rights and liberties and fight off against bad legislation that seeks to try to take those away. And with that, I will pass to Alex.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Karambulis. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the other policy advocate here at the ACLU of Vermont. I joined in January of this past year, and my issue areas primarily focus on economic justice and then also healthcare. I'm going to pass it along to Emmy.
Hi, everyone. I am Emmy. I use she, her pronouns. I have been with the ACLU for 4 days, so that's why you didn't see me last week. I am ACLU's new field manager, so basically my main job is to work with all of you, the volunteers, and help mobilize folks, get them to the State House, make sure legislators hear from you, and get into the communities of Vermont. So I am super excited to meet you. And super excited to learn from the other fine folks on the advocacy team. So thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emmy, for joining us. We're really excited to have you on the team, and I'm sure all the folks on this call are going to be hearing from her a bunch more in the coming weeks and months. And we hope that you join us for future Advocacy Academy sessions and other community engagement opportunities that I know Emmy's going to be helping spearhead. So with that, we're going to dive into tonight's presentation, and I'm going to start with a little bit of, legislative 101. Not going to do too much of the Schoolhouse Rock presentation today, but want to let you know a little bit about who are your legislators and why it matters to get into, to engage with them, the type of decisions they make, and just a little bit more about the process here in Vermont. So here in Vermont, we have a state legislature comprised of 150 representatives and 30 senators, so 180 in all. And everyone in the state of Vermont has at least one representative and at least one senator that represents them. And these folks work part-time, generally January to May up in the legislature with a lot of off-session work. And most of them have to have other jobs within the community. This is really a citizen legislature, and it's somewhat unique in legislatures around the country. These folks don't have staff, they don't have offices, and it is one of the most accountable legislatures I've ever seen or heard of in terms of having to be directly responsive to their constituents. And that's part of the reason that grassroots democracy is really happening on a person-sized scale here in the state of Vermont. And so, just a little bit of background um, about the State House itself. I've been working up there in one way or another for about the last 16 years at this point, and it is really a unique place. And it's called the People's House for a reason. The State House is accessible throughout the year. You can tour it and see what's going on, but it's also very accessible during the legislative session. And as we're going to be asking folks to come join us up in the State House throughout the session and get engaged, but it's something you can also do on your own. If you're ever interested in what's happening up there, we're going to teach you a little bit more about how do you find out what issues are being taken up in committee and how do you get engaged. And just some things to know about the State House. When you get there, you can find, we'll send a link around in the follow-up email that shows people the floor plan, but often you'll find out committee hearings are happening in this room or that room with a number on them. You can look that way. But one thing it's good to know is generally all the doors of the State House are open. The etiquette is that you can walk into any committee room and generally just sit down and join the conversation from the outside. Maybe not actually pipe in right away unless you're actually asked to do that by the legislators or the chair. But it's also a great place to find your legislators and connect with them. Uh, I am a registered lobbyist, and I think Vermont is one of the few places where that literally means I spend a lot of time sitting in the lobby waiting for folks to come and walk by so I can catch their ear. And I'll say things like, "Oh, do you have a minute? Can we have a conversation about X, Y, or Z?" Other places you're having to work with staff, schedule meetings, stuff like that. But it is very much the people's house. It is open place for everyone. And it can feel a little intimidating at times just because of everything that's happening. But our goal is to work with you all over the next couple months and throughout the session to make it feel more inviting and make it definitely feel like it's your house where you have the opportunity to make your voice heard. Because one of the things that I love about doing the work that we do here in the Vermont State House is I have seen those one-on-one conversations from constituents make the difference in a bill, whether it passes or it dies, and seen those conversations brought into the legislative conversation in a way that can have a real meaningful impact. And Alex is going to talk a little bit more about that as we go forward, about how do you craft those messages and how do you have impacts with those decision makers. But it's a really special place. And it's quirky, it's unique. I often describe it as feeling a lot like middle school because folks basically they don't have their own offices. They go to their homeroom, which is their committee. They got a desk where they get to keep their stuff. Most of them eat lunch in the same cafeteria together where you can find pretty much anyone during the lunch hour. And then they all go to all school assembly, which would be either the House or Senate floor in the morning or the afternoon. Um, and so it's a fascinating and unique place, but really important decisions are being made there on your behalf all the time. So it's important that you feel that you can engage and that you can be part of the process. And that's what we're going to try and dig into a little bit more tonight. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jordan to tell you a little bit more about how do you find out who your legislators are and how do you connect with them?
Thank you, Falco. So, being able to connect with your local legislator is obviously an integral part of our democratic process. It's what enables us to voice our concerns and advocate for the changes that we want to see both locally and throughout the state. So, for this section of the presentation, I'm going to share with you all how to figure out who your lawmakers are, where you can find information on them, and how to best contact them. And as Falco was saying, very rightfully, the State House is the people's house. So Fortunately, a lot of this information can be found on the legislature's website, and they tried to make it as easy and accessible as it is to find this information. We're going to be walking you through a little bit about that. So first off, the easiest way to connect with your legislators is to call the State House. Simply look up who your local representative or senator is, which we will show you how to do in a moment. Oh, yeah. Oh, go back one more. So, thanks. And then you can call the number on the screen, which is 802-828-2228. And they are generally available Monday through Friday between 8:30 and 4:30. Make sure that you have a relatively short message prepared ahead of time and ask that it be delivered to your representative or senator. And we'll be giving you all some tips on the best ways to craft your message towards the end of the presentation. All right, next slide. So if you're not certain who your local representative or senator is, on the legislature homepage, you will see a green search bar with 3 tabs. And click on the tab labeled Legislator, shown in the picture with the red arrow, and then enter the name of your town or your city. Next. Then you'll be taken to the Find Your Legislator page, where you'll be able to see all the representatives and senators in your area, which districts they represent, as well as which political party they're affiliated with. And if for any reason you're unsure which district you are located in, on that page you can click the district link and it will provide you a map of that district. Now, if you know the name of your legislator, you can simply type their name in the search bar. It is important to know the correct spelling of their name, otherwise it won't pull up the information. Personally, I've had many issues with this, so pro tip. You will then be taken to their information page. Here you can find their email address, phone number, mailing address, as well as the various committees they serve on. You can also find some biographical information if you're interested in learning more about that particular legislator's background. Next. Also, if you scroll, to the bottom of that page, you can see which bills that legislator has sponsored, as well as how they voted on various bills, which is really good information to have if you're looking to see what kind of bills they typically work on and see what issues they care most about and just generally how they vote. Next, I want to talk a little bit about legislative committees. These are where a majority of the legislative work is done. It's where various issues are studied, where experts and community members are heard, and where the bills are drafted. There are various types of committees. The most, important, used, the one that I certainly spend the most of my time observing are standing committees. There are about 14 standing committees on the House side and 11 on the Senate side, and each committee covers a different legislative issue. Generally, they meet between Tuesdays and Fridays during the legislative session. Now, there are other types of committees, such as joint committees that usually combined different standing committees, conference committees for when there is disagreement between the legislative chambers, which usually takes place towards the end of the legislative session, and then as well as study committees, which are usually created to, as the name suggests, study a particular topic. They provide written reports and recommendations, and usually are dissolved once their reports or recommendations are completed. You can find an explainer of the various committee types on the legislative webpage under the State House tab in the About Legislative Committees subtab. But the State House tab has lots of good civic education information, and I highly recommend playing around with the website. There's a lot of really cool stuff on it. I know, Jordan, you sound like a nerd. That's because I am. Now, to look up, oh, yep. Oh, wait, sorry. Ooh. Okay, cool. Um, Now, to look up a specific committee on the homepage, you go to the committee tab, and then the drop-down menu will appear that looks just like this. That will list all the various standing committees as well as other committee types that you see on the side. Now, when you click on a particular committee, and in this case, we use the House Judiciary Committee as an example, and that's also happens to be the one where I spend most of my time at. You'll be taken to a summary page that tells you who is on that committee, what the committee's weekly schedule will look like, which right now we're not in session, so there is no schedule, but that's where you would see which topics they're covering in a given week. And you also have access to all the documents and handouts that were submitted to the committee to aid in the various hearings and conversations on a particular topic. Also, there is a YouTube link where you can watch live committee hearings online as well as find previous hearings to go back through. And lastly, I wanted to share with you a little bit about bill tracking. Luckily, the website makes this fairly straightforward to figure out what bills are being introduced, to which committees they're located in, and where they are in the legislative process. So if you know the bill number, you can type it in the green search bar under the Bills or Resolutions tab, highlighted by the red arrow. There, you're able to see who sponsored the bill. You can pull up the bill language and the various drafts of it. You can also find what actions have been taken on that bill and which days those actions were taken. And this can be very helpful if you're trying to watch legislative testimony on a particular bill. On the website, you can go back, find that which day which day the hearing was on, and pull up all the information regarding that particular hearing. Next slide. Also, if you know which committee the bill is in, on the committee page, you can type the bill number in the document search, and it will let you know specifically what days the information on the bill was heard and the documents submitted in support or opposition to said bill. So within the legislative webpage, there's a lot of links that you can click to that makes it easier to navigate the webpage and figure out where the various information on the bills are. Now here we've uploaded, yep, that was good. We've uploaded a short video sort of walking through everything we just discussed, navigating the legislative website for viewers who are more visual learners. Now, we won't go through it tonight, but it will be available for you all in the slides when we send out this presentation, generally as a resource for you all, if you find it easier to navigate the website that way. All right, and with that, I will pass it to Alex to learn more about how you can have more effective conversations with decision makers.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Yeah, so this section here is going to focus on building relationships with legislators, and we just recommend that you do this generally. If you go to those pages, you'll see the emails for the legislators listed. We recommend just reaching out and contacting them, letting them know the issues that you care about, and requesting a quick 15-minute meeting. Oftentimes, when you email a legislator, in their signature, you might see a Calendly link, which is a link to schedule a meeting. So just a helpful pro tip for you. We recommend providing that short communication in writing over email. And then when you're having these conversations, we recommend a few key things. One is taking a solutions-based approach. The second is to try to understand the views of those who might oppose you in these conversations, and then to share your personal story as a focal point. And that's something that we're going to get into later in this presentation. And I think all of this is to say, if you have already built this relationship with your legislator, if they know who you are, it's going to be a lot more effective for you to impact a particular moment in time. Let's say, they're about to vote on an issue. You have this relationship, you want to urge them to vote a certain way. Having this foundational relationship can be key. And so something else that we wanted to highlight is testimony. And as previously discussed, testimony is really where a lot of the action in our state house occurs. Committees will host testimony on a particular bill or topic, and they'll invite people to share. A lot of the folks that end up sharing testimony might be professional experts on a topic, but they also invite people who are maybe directly impacted by a bill. And so if any of those categories kind of fits with you, we recommend you reaching out and asking to testify on a particular bill or topic. So you would introduce yourself in email to the committee assistant and the committee chairs. You might want to reach out with some key information, such as your personal story, maybe one piece of relevant data highlighting the issue, and one solution to the problem. And if you get invited to testify, we recommend that you take a moment and just review the current status of the bill before heading into that room. Testimony is something that can be done remotely or in person, just to let you know. And so we do recommend practicing either accessing Zoom. I know that that's something that I can sometimes have issues with. And so giving yourself a little buffer is helpful. Or you might want to walk around the building with a little bit of time beforehand to find where you're going. When you do share testimony, it's always helpful to have a written version ready. They're going to ask for that. And something I want to highlight is that the goal with outreach is to build a relationship. You might want to do this before or after you speak to a committee. Maybe you want to talk to some legislators in the hallway. And it's just always really important, again, to have that foundational relationship. We're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about messaging. And so I'm going to highlight two key kind of ways to message after this, but I just want to talk about this concept broadly first. Messaging is the art of framing a topic, an idea, a policy in a way that is aligned with the beliefs of others. The point of messaging is to connect your ask to the values of the person that you're reaching out to. And because of this, knowing your audience is key. Ahead of these conversations, it can be helpful to know what a legislator cares about, what they don't care about, common misconceptions or concerns related to your policy, their political affiliation, their professional background, and the priorities of their constituent base. You don't need to know all of these things, but it just can be helpful to inform your conversations. And something that I do if I know I'm scheduling a meeting with a legislator, I'll go to that page that has their bio and I'll see if there's anything that I can talk about that is related to their background. Another helpful tip is if you don't know a lot about your legislator, give them a quick Google search. Oftentimes folks will still have their campaign websites active, and that will give a pretty good overview of their platform and the issues that they care about that you can then pull into your conversation. Normally I would have this be like a discussion-based question, but since we're in a webinar, I'm going to ask that you all do a quick personal check-in. Can you think of an example where you convinced another person of something that they were not initially sold on? This could be policy related or not. Maybe you recently asked your boss for a raise. How did you convince your child to go to soccer practice this week? How did you frame the conversation and ask what worked and what did not work? And I think that what you'll find is that all of us are messaging experts in some way, and policy messaging is not so different. So this is the first tool that we're going to talk about here, and this is about crafting your pitch. This is kind of like a more formal form of messaging. I like to have a pitch ready to go when I'm having a conversation with someone about a policy. And despite all the words on this screen, it's actually very simple. You're going to want to talk about a value that you're trying to affirm. You're going to want to talk about a problem that your policy will solve. You're going to want to talk about the solution, and you're going to want to talk about an action that someone can take. And so this is kind of, I guess, a framework that we use at the ACLU when we're doing messaging, whether we're writing, email outreach or providing testimony. This is the kind of format that we follow. And I always like to have this ready to go when I am meeting with legislators. So we're going to go through an example here. And so this policy that we're going to be using as an example is one that I'm going to use as an example for other slides. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. And this is focused on sensitive locations. The policy that we are going to be running with this year will prevent federal agents from making warrantless immigration arrests in private spaces such as schools and healthcare facilities, and expand Vermont's ban on civil arrests at courthouses to include other government buildings. So essentially prohibiting ICE arrests at all these sensitive locations. And so if I were to take that policy and if I were to try to craft a pitch, I would try to highlight all of these elements. What's my value, problem, data, solution, and action? And so the value would be that we should all feel safe in our communities, especially places like schools and hospitals. The problem, I would maybe say something like across the country, federal agents are terrorizing our community by conducting unlawful immigration arrests. They are brazenly invading community spaces like our schools, hospitals, places of worship to stalk and arrest people from our communities. And then when federal agents target these locations, people are afraid to go there, thereby by preventing them from getting, essential services that can potentially put their lives in danger. I might want to highlight one relevant data piece. And something just to note here is that the data could show the problem or the solution. For this policy, the data point that we included is that the Trump administration claimed to only be going after the worst of the worst criminals. But for the nearly 60,000 people detained by ICE as of September, over 70% have no criminal convictions. And many of those who do have really minor convictions related to like traffic violations. And so the data is clear. The Trump administration is not trying to protect us from dangerous criminals. They are rounding up our immigrants. And as a solution, I would obviously point to this policy. And then as an action, I would ask them to vote for it. So this is just kind of a breakdown. We're going to be sending these slides out to you after the presentation if you want to take a closer look at how we did this. But it's just a really nice framework for you to be able to use in your own conversations. Next, I'm going to talk about sharing your personal story. And while having that pitch is really key, it's essential, it's really helpful, and honestly, it helps me feel more prepared when I'm in these really formal settings. What's actually more impactful to those conversations are your personal lived experiences. And the way that you go about crafting your personal story, which is basically to take your life experiences and turn it into a narrative form that you can share. It's going to look really different if you are a person who is directly impacted by a policy versus someone who is an ally. And so I'm going to go through kind of two of those options and some of the prompts that you might want to think about. So again, we're using the policy as an example, prohibiting ICE arrests at sensitive locations. And if I was a person who was directly impacted by this issue, I might ask myself these questions. When have I had an experience where I felt at risk, where I felt like my well-being and safety was threatened? What parts of our community or systems make me feel more or less at risk? What does support and safety look like or feel like to you? And then this one is really key and I think can be kind of applied to any policy area. What is at stake for you with this particular policy? What does it mean? And then lastly, what do you feel comfortable sharing about your identity or your journey? You want to prioritize your own sense of well-being and safety in these conversations. So checking in with yourself about what you feel comfortable sharing is important. And I just want to say for each of these questions, consider it almost like a creative writing exercise. I think it's really important for you to think about these questions in a really granular sense. Like if I'm thinking about what safety and support looks and feels like to me, I might try to think of a really specific example. What time of day was it? Where was I? And that can kind of help you shape this narrative in a way that brings people into your lived experience. If I was an ally, I would ask myself different questions. Maybe I would want to tell a story about a time a loved one was failed by government policies. Or, maybe I want to share if I'm not personally impacted by an issue, maybe I want to share about how I envision a safe community and think, what would a community with vibrant support systems look like? What would it feel like? What do we need to achieve to get there? And then lastly, I would share my feelings about specific issues and solutions related to a policy goal. It might sound counterintuitive to tell you to talk about feelings in, policy spaces, but it actually is the most important thing that you can do. And so I just want to put up a quick example of what a personal narrative story might look like if you are an ally, because I think that can be a little bit trickier for folks. So again, if I'm talking about this issue of prohibiting ICE arrests at sensitive locations, this might be an example. I have friends and neighbors who are so worried about being detained by ICE that they are scared to send their kids to school every day. I've heard of community members being too fearful to go to a hospital or a doctor. All people deserve these essential services, and I find it unacceptable for people to feel that their lives and their freedom are in danger here in Vermont. I'm watching the news every day. I'm seeing families and children being taken off the street, and I too am afraid for what ICE's actions mean for all of our rights and freedoms. And so, again, making it personal, bringing it back down to your own personal lived experience. So, we went over crafting a personal story because it's a really crucial part of this tool called deep canvassing. And so I'm going to get into what this is, but just know that this is a form of persuasion. So canvassing typically describes the process of knocking on doors or making phone calls to neighbors, but it can be used in more casual conversations. So this could be to legislators, or you could use deep canvassing on your friends, family, really anyone, any one-on-one conversation. If you're trying to convince someone, if you're trying to persuade someone to change their perspective on an issue, you can use deep canvassing. So persuasion canvassing, again, the act of outreach to someone who may not agree with you, someone you have to persuade. And this was a technique that was first developed by activists fighting for LGBTQ rights. And studies show that it is over 100 times more successful with swaying individuals than other persuasion canvassing methods. Deep canvassing holds that the most effective way to bring someone into a new understanding of an issue is to hold space for them via radical empathy and ask questions that will allow a person to confront and reckon with their own logic. Deep canvassing asks you to fully listen to the individual's point of view and experiences without judgment, create a space for them to be honest or vulnerable, share your personal narrative and experiences, highlight your common humanity, and then ask questions that will allow the person you're talking to challenge their own ideas. And so, to better explain what deep canvassing is and how it works, we're going to share a quick video here. This is a video that goes into the theory with the founder of deep canvassing, and I do just want to say that this video shows a conversation where deep canvassing is used, and the person that they're canvassing does use harmful and homophobic language, and so I wanted to be sure to put a trigger warning for this video. It's about 5 minutes and 30 seconds for anyone who wants to step away for a second. So I'm going to play this video right now.
When was the last time you changed your mind about anything really important? Was it because somebody told you it was time to change your mind?
In 2015, the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. But for decades before that, at a state and national level, activists on both sides fought heated battles. This is the story of one of those activists. That guy right there, that's Dave Fleischer.
Thank you. That was very nice of you to get that.
Dave is gay,
I knew I was gay when I was 6 years old.
and that motivated him.
You bet. I've been interested in how to reduce and eliminate prejudice my entire life.
He became an activist and ended up working at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. Then something really surprising happened.
In 2008, we had this terrible loss on gay marriage.
California voters approved a measure that would make gay marriage illegal in the state.
All the polls showed that the pro-LGBT side would win easily.
But they lost. This was a huge blow to the LGBT community.
Most people weren't sure what to do.
So Dave and team made a decision.
So we decided to stop making assumptions about the people who voted against us and instead to go meet them.
They went to the heart of the counties where they lost the worst and had 15,000 one-on-one conversations. And Dave's team discovered that the single thing that had the biggest impact
Was when the voter told a story of theirs that had emotional weight for them and seemed relevant to them to what we were talking about.
Dave and team call their approach deep canvassing, and now they do it all over the country. But to watch it unfold is fascinating. Here's a voter and a canvasser, Virginia. They're talking about whether transgender people should be allowed in the bathroom of the sex that they identify with. The voter is not into that.
Using main clothing clothing to the ladies room. I don't know like
You ever met anybody who's gay or transgender? Never?
So Virginia asks him about that.
because I'm from South America. In South America, we don't like police.
And now Virginia reveals something personal.
So I'm gay. So you said like back earlier? Yeah, I'm gay.
Why is that take that decision?
So for me, it wasn't really a decision or like a choice. It was like, this is just who I am. Like, I love who I love, like from who that person is.
The number one way to persuade someone is to help them consider and reflect on their own real lived experiences.
Now, I'm gladly in love with this person. Their name is Lauren.
No. He is married now. I have to take care of it, but really take care of it.
Knowing when my partner, like your wife, right? Like when the people we love are dealing with something that impacts them daily. Yeah.
What the voter realizes as he's thinking about his relationship with his wife is that the way that he loves her is awfully similar to the way Virginia cares for Lourdes.
Talking to is more comfort. Like it's not scary. It's comfort.
It's not us changing their mind. It's really us having a conversation that allows the voter to change their own mind for themselves. The reason these conversations work is that voters have an appetite for reflection. And when they realize it is what we're offering, they're excited to talk.
I thank you that I could ask a question like this and be responding with elegance. And
Well, yeah, that's why we're out here.
so this is probably I was mistaken.
Because of examples like this, Dave and his team, they're optimistic.
What would happen if all of us stopped spending so much of our time with people who are just like us, and we spent more of our time reaching out to people who aren't like us? Think about how that would change who we are, our understanding of the world. Think about how it would change this country and how it would change our politics.
All right. So that is a quick overview of what deep canvassing is. And so I just want to say, even though we had some information here around crafting a pitch and using these data sources and having a problem statement and a solution statement, all that is great, particularly if you're giving testimony, but we're not going to change hearts and minds like that. We really need to have these one-on-one conversations and inviting people in to a new understanding of a policy issue. And so I'm going to go over some of the steps of deep canvassing, and then I will take you through an example of what this might look like for the policy issue that we've been highlighting throughout the session. And please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to ask open-ended questions. You want to get a person's opinion on the issue. You would actively listen without judgment, ask follow-up questions, really try to explore their point of view and let them know that you're listening to them. You're going to want to acknowledge their point of view and empathize with the underlying emotions or values that you are able to glean from their viewpoint. And then you're going to want to share your personal story or reason for involvement. You would want to highlight shared values that you can find between your values and theirs, and then connect it back to the policy as simply as possible. Explain what the policy aims to accomplish. And this will be done best by connecting to a value that they hold. And so if I were to go into, this issue of prohibiting arrests within sensitive locations, let's just say that I was talking to a legislator. I might want to introduce myself. I'm a volunteer with the ACLU of Vermont, taking time out of my day to talk to you about immigrant protections. I'm wondering if you have a minute to share your thoughts on ICE arrests and detentions in our community. And, if someone is aligned with you on this, I think it would probably be a pretty quick conversation. You would just tell them that there's this really wonderful bill that they can vote for, and that would be it. But in many other instances, someone may not share that same viewpoint as you. And so this is just an example of the kinds of questions that you might want to ask someone that will bring them more deeply into a conversation and maybe even encourage them to confront their own logic. You might want to ask something like, what do you think are the current goals of ICE? Do you think that these goals will be achieved by making arrests at schools? Is this a good thing? Who benefits from this? Who's harmed by this? Really trying to kind of paint your side of the picture through questions instead of through telling. Something that I've actually used quite a bit in these kinds of conversations, and I think is a really helpful question just to have in your back pocket. I'll ask, what is on either side of the issue for you? This is really helpful because it kind of forces someone to get into the mind of a viewpoint that they don't necessarily agree with or understand. And oftentimes, a lot of these issues are really about, the well-being and livelihood of our community versus funding. And so this can be a really helpful question to ask in those specific instances. Um, you know, Instead of saying, we are a country of immigrants, I might ask a question, what is the legacy of immigration in your family? Something else that comes up, particularly for people where they're not telling you that they disagree with you, but you can tell that they do. Something that maybe they're saying that they have this like, imaginary constituent base that really disagrees with this policy. And so I might kind of use that third person framing to talk to them. Do you know anyone who supports ICE's current practices? What do they say? What do you say to them? Another question to ask, which is really important, is, do you know anyone who's been harmed by our immigration systems? Oftentimes, people will hold very harmful viewpoints because they are disconnected from an issue and disconnected from the community that's impacted by the issue. So instead of telling them that, asking them if they know anyone, and when they say they don't, will kind of allow a person to come to that conclusion on their own. This question sounds really silly, the next one on this list, but I ask it and it works. Do you think that it's necessary to change systems that threaten people's lives? And this is something that I will ask legislators who tell me, I'm with you, I agree with you on it, but it's just too hard, but X, Y, and Z. Really trying to confront them with the power that they do have to make change can be very important. Um, and then, have you ever had an experience where you didn't feel protected or supported by the state? Sometimes, if you're just not able to find common ground on one issue, you can still open up someone to a larger conversation by using a different issue as a proxy. So you would ask these kinds of questions, and hopefully, someone would start to open up to you a little bit more, tell you how they really feel about an issue. And while they might, do this in a harmful way, I think that is really important for us to consistently be checking in with ourselves. Like having these conversations is incredibly important, but if the conversation is veering into a territory where you do not feel psychologically safe, it is okay to end those conversations. So I just want to be clear that this is not necessarily a technique that works for everyone. Um, and so the third step here, you would acknowledge their point of view, and if you can, their underlying humanity, values, or motivation. If I was thinking about ICE arrests at sensitive locations, maybe someone says that they support ICE's activities because they have heard that the goals of that agency is to, take criminals off the street. And so if I were to listen to that kind of a statement, I might be able to glean, oh, they what they are really saying they care about is their sense of personal safety. So I might take that, I might talk about safety, and I might talk about how this actually makes our communities less safe, how it makes the people who are impacted by this less safe, or how making arrests at schools does not make anyone safer. And so I might kind of try to build off of what they tell me. Then you would want to share your personal story. I'm out here today because, it was hard for me to confront, or I had my eyes opened when, and you would want to bridge your story with the values that you are able to gather from what they're saying. It sounds like you really care about this. And then you would want to connect back to the proposal. You can, pose facts as questions. Do you know that currently in Vermont, ICE is able to make arrests at our schools? And then you can kind of cycle through some of those questions. So that is an overview of deep canvassing. And I believe that that concludes our overview for today. But I just want to say, if you are not a policy expert, that does not mean that you cannot impact these conversations. All of us can. We all have a personal reason for why we're here. Why did you jump on this call today? I think that that's a very legitimate question and can be your answer that you give in these conversations with legislators. We're all here for a reason. So thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Emmy. So we're gonna wrap up a little bit early, but I did want to take a moment and open the floor for questions if anyone had anything to ask before we leave, and if not, happy to give you back a few minutes of your evening, and really appreciate you being here. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer them. But we're not seeing any right now. And so with that, I'll just say thank you so much for being here tonight. We really, really appreciate it. We hope that you'll join us for our presentation next week, same bat time, same bat channel, next Thursday at 5:30. We're going to be talking a little bit more about things that you can do in your community and other ways that you can be effective as an advocate, talking about things like writing letters to the editors and other ways that you can get involved to help make needed policy change. And just really appreciate the support that you all give to us, the work that you're doing in your communities, the ways that you're all getting involved. And we got a couple questions in the chat. One of the questions is, how can I find out about ACLU's legislative agenda for the year? Great. So we talked a good bit about that last week in our presentation, and we'll make sure that we include both that presentation as well as a recent action form that should be hitting an action form that should be hitting folks' inboxes tomorrow, I believe. That's focusing on our work around the firewall for freedom, which is a number of different policy initiatives that that legislators at the state level can move forward this year to help protect us from some of the abuses of power we're seeing on the federal level, as well as some of our other work. But we'll be staying in touch. Make sure you're signed up for our email alerts. That is the best way to find out all the things we're doing. But in the follow-up email, we'll make sure that we send both that action link as well as last week's presentation, which highlights a number of the things that we're working on. So thank you for that question, Dakota. And thank you, Roberta, for your gratitude. Yeah, and I think Blaine asked, how can we discuss potential additional policy initiatives that the ACLU will support? A great way to reach out to us is info@acluVT.org. Our colleague Jess does a great job with in fielding all of the inquiries and things that come through that portal and then directing them to the appropriate folks on our staff. So one more time, I'll type this into the chat so folks have it. It's info@acluVT.com. Sorry, figuring out the tech here. Are there any more additional questions? So that's a great way to reach out to us. And as I said, our colleague Jess is fielding all those questions and can either get you in touch with one of us directly, or if it's a question that's more appropriate for someone on our legal or other teams, that's a great way to get in touch with us, and we'll find a way to get back in touch with you. And happy to consider any policy initiatives that folks are thinking about. Also, you can check out our website where there's more information about the things that we're working on and some of the past work that we've done.
And I'm so sorry, I just want to make a quick correction. It's info@acluvt.org. So I'll put that in the chat.
That's what happens when I'm moving too quickly. I'll do it again.
I put it in. We're good.
All right, thank you, Jordan. Yes, .org, not .com. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. We hope to see some of you or all of you again next week, and we will be in touch. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.